Okay, today's Q&A is about Davar Charif, and the question is that the person says, I know that there are special rules for onions, halachic rules about onions, and they want to know a little bit more what that means. So onions are a very common example of what we call Davar Charif, something that has a strong, pungent taste, and makes them, because they have this charif taste, they're treated more strictly than other foods. So now we're going to talk today about onions, but I want to mention some other examples of a Davar Charif: garlic cloves, herring, horseradish, lemon juice, olives, pickles, radishes, scallions, vinegar, whiskey. Those are all different examples of the place can speak about things that are charif, and I'll use some of those in my examples I'm going to be talking about. And something is charif affects how taste transfers in a couple of different ways. So the first one is that if you cut or chop or grind a Davar Charif, you do put some pressure on the across the Davar Charif, then tam will transfer even though they're not hot. I mean, usually tam only transfers when things are hot, but when a Davar Charif gets cut or ground or chopped, one of those kind of things, then tam transfers anyhow. So for example, if you cut a pickle with a milchik knife, that pickle can't be put into a corned beef sandwich now because the pickle absorbed tam from the milchik knife, and it can't be eaten with meat. And just as sort of an aside to that is that, if for the more advanced, is that since it's charif, the leniency of not bar also doesn't apply. Okay, now this idea that a Davar Charif that's cut has a stricter status is only for something that's solid, like an onion or a lemon, or the example I gave was a pickle. But a liquid couldn't possibly cut. Let's say vinegar, you can't cut vinegar. So of course, this halacha of Davar Charif wouldn't apply to it. But a second halacha of Davar Charif would, and that's called Machai Le'Lishvach. It applies to any Davar Charif, and I just got to give a drop of background to explain what that means, Machai Le'Lishvach. So the general halacha is that if you cook kosher food in a non-kosher pot, or for that matter, of course, a milchig, a fleishig, a charmitz pot, whatever, we'll call it a non-kosher pot, then the food becomes non-kosher. If the pot that was not kosher had not been used for 24 hours beforehand, then the food b'diavad is going to be kosher. And we say the tam became lefgam, it became stale. The tam that's in there is not bad enough that it can affect your food. You can't do it lechatchila, but b'diavad the food will be okay. Now, that leniency, that once it's after 24 hours, the food is mutter b'diavad, does not apply if the food was charif, if the kosher food was charif. Which is to say the kosher food that's in there is machai le'lishvach. It takes the stale taste that was in there, that's been more than 24 hours since you cooked in it, and it reawakens it. It gets it, refreshes it, and makes it. And that would, because of that, the food that was cooked in there is going to be considered, treif, even b'diavad. Now, when this idea of machai le'lishvach only what we care what's charif is if the kosher food was charif. It doesn't make a difference whether the original food was or was not charif. That plays no role over here. The only thing that's important is whether the kosher food that was cooked in the Eina ben Yom pot, the pot that had been used in 24 hours, whether that one is charif. Now, about a third of chomer there's a machlekes, and that is usually if a liquid sits in a container for 24 consecutive hours, then time transfers between the liquid and the container, even if neither of them is hot. That's called kavash. Now, there are some liquids, like brine, which make the transfer happen much quicker, just in a couple of minutes. And there's a machlekes whether Davar Charif should have that extra chumrah, that it makes the tam transfer quickly, when a liquid sits in a container. So the Shulchan Aruch says it does. He says even the charif has the same thing. So, for example, he would hold that if I put whiskey into a non-kosher cup and it sits there for a couple of minutes, then the whiskey becomes non-kosher because it transfers time from the cup in a couple of minutes, and it would make the whiskey not kosher. The whiskey is Davar Charif. It would make the whiskey non-kosher. The Shach argues and says, no, this chomer does not apply to charif. It only applies to certain other things, and brine, and therefore he holds that it takes 24 hours for tam to transfer just like any other liquid. Okay, now, all these things that I've been mentioning about Davar Charif is only while the food still has it still has this strong, pungent taste to it. But once you cook it or you blend it with other ingredients enough to the point that it doesn't have that taste anymore, then the charif status disappears as well. Meaning, if you'd use it in the future. For example, if I had a fleishig soup that had some garlic in it, or if I squeeze some squeeze some lemon juice into tea, then the soup or the tea are not charif, because by that time they're not very strong anymore. The little bit of garlic in the soup doesn't make such a difference anymore, and the lemon juice in the tea doesn't give such a charif taste to it, and therefore all the strict halachas that apply to charif wouldn't apply to them anymore.